What happened when you met your school love? Story 1. I hadn't thought about my high school love in years until I bumped into her at a cafe one random afternoon. Her name was Lily, and seeing her sitting there with that same smile from all those years ago brought back a flood of memories. We were both 28, and it had been over a decade since graduation. She saw me, and her face lit up as if no time had passed at all. We ended up chatting for hours, catching up on life. She told me she was recently divorced, and I told her I had been focused on work, not dating much. One drink turned into 3, and before I knew it, we were back at my place. The chemistry was still there, and we spent the night together. The next morning, there was no awkwardness, no regret, just laughter and a sense of familiarity. We've been casually seeing each other ever since, and while it's still early days, part of me wonders if we were meant to reconnect all along. Story 2. I never imagined I'd see my high school crush again, but fate had other plans. I was at a friend's wedding when I saw her, Emily, walking in with her husband. We hadn't spoken in years, and I had always wondered what became of her. Turns out she married one of our old classmates, Dave, the guy who used to copy off me in math class. I couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy, but I decided to be civil and went over to say hello. Emily greeted me warmly, and we caught up for a bit. It was strange hearing about their life together, the kids they had, and how they still lived in the same town we grew up in. As much as it stung, I realized she was genuinely happy. After that, I stayed polite but kept my distance for the rest of the night. Seeing her like that closed a chapter in my life, and I knew it was time to fully move on. Story 3. A few months ago, I ran into my high school girlfriend Sarah at a grocery store of all places. We hadn't seen each other in over a decade. She looked just like I remembered, only more grown up, more confident. We got to talking, and it felt like no time had passed at all. We laughed about old times, the awkward teenage years, and the notes we used to pass in class. After catching up, we decided to grab coffee, and one coffee turned into dinner. That dinner turned into us seeing each other regularly. It was like something out of a movie. We reconnected on a deeper level than we ever had before. Fast forward 6 months, and now we're engaged. Neither of us expected it, but meeting her again was like finding a missing piece I didn't even know I'd lost. It's crazy how life works sometimes. Story 4. A few years back, I attended my high school reunion just out of curiosity, not. A brief nostalgic reconnection, nothing more. Story 7. I was at my high school reunion, which I almost didn't attend, when I saw him. Jake, my first real crush from back in the day. We hadn't talked in years, but seeing him there brought back all the memories. He still had that same easy smile and charm that used to make me swoon. We spent most of the night catching up, laughing about old times, and reminiscing about the trouble we used to get into. As the night went on, it felt like we were the only 2 people in the room. Eventually, we ended up outside, just the 2 of us talking under the stars. That's when he told me he had always liked me back in school, but he never had the guts to say anything. I was shocked. Before I knew it, he kissed me. It felt like something out of a movie, like we had picked up right where we left off. We spent the rest of the night together, and for a moment, it felt like maybe we could make something work. But when morning came, reality set in. He was married now, with kids, and while we both enjoyed the nostalgia of the moment, we knew it couldn't be more than a brief walk down memory lane. We said our goodbyes and went our separate ways, but I'll always remember that night. It was like revisiting a chapter of my life I'd long closed. Story 8. I was at the grocery store when I ran into Matt, my high school boyfriend. We hadn't seen each other in over a decade, and honestly, I was caught off guard. We did that awkward small talk at first. How have you been? And what are you up to these days? But it didn't take long before we started talking about the old days. It felt strange seeing him in the middle of a supermarket aisle after all these years. He looked the same, but different. A little older, a little more polished, but that same smile that used to make my heart race. As we stood there chatting, I couldn't help but think about how we had broken up after graduation, both heading off to different colleges and promising to stay in touch. But life happened. Then, out of nowhere, he dropped the bomb. He was married to Sarah, one of our old classmates. The funny thing is, I remember her having a crush on him back in the day, and now here they were, married with 2 kids. We both laughed at the irony of it. As we parted ways, he waved and smiled, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of nostalgia and contentment. It wasn't awkward or sad, just a reminder of how life moves on, and we all end up where we're supposed to be. We didn't exchange numbers or make plans to meet again. Some things are better left in the past, I guess. Story 9. It was a typical Friday night when I walked into the bar with some friends. Not. expecting much. We were just out for a few drinks, nothing special, but as soon as I stepped up to the counter to order, I saw her. Amanda, my high school crush. She was sitting at a table with some friends, laughing, and for a second it felt like I was 17 again. I couldn't believe it. We hadn't seen each other since graduation, and honestly, I never thought I would. My heart started racing, and after some encouragement from my friends, I decided to walk over. She looked up and smiled as soon as she saw me, like no time had passed. We started talking, reminiscing about the good old days, sharing funny stories, and catching up on life. She told me about her job and the travels she had been on, and I told her about my life. After a while, her friends left and we ended up staying, talking until the bar closed. It was like we picked up right where we left off. And by the end of the night, we found ourselves back at my place. The next morning was strange though. We had an amazing night, but we both knew it wasn't going anywhere. She had just gotten out of a serious relationship, and I wasn't really looking for anything either. We exchanged numbers, but deep down, I think we both knew it was a one-time thing. Still, it was nice to reconnect, if only for a night, and remember what we used to feel. Story 10. A few years ago, I was at my cousin's wedding when I saw someone I hadn't seen in over a decade. Emma, my high school love. We dated for most of our senior year and even talked about going to the same college, but life took us in different directions. Seeing her across the room brought back a flood of memories, and before I knew it, I was walking over to say hi. She looked even more beautiful than I remembered, and when she saw me, her eyes lit up. We hugged, started talking, and pretty soon, it felt like no time had passed. We spent the whole night chatting, laughing about our high school days, and catching up on where life had taken us. I found out she had been married, but recently got divorced, and was now raising a young daughter on her own. I told her about my job, my travels, and how I was still single. As the night went on, there was a spark between us again. By the end of the wedding, I asked her if she wanted to grab coffee the next day, and she agreed. That coffee date turned into dinner, and soon we were seeing each other regularly. It felt like fate had brought us back together. A year later, I proposed, and now we're married with a baby on the way. It's funny how life works out sometimes. If you had told me back in high school that I'd marry my first love, I wouldn't have believed it. But here we are, happy and building a life together.